The Gospel according to Luke. Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats, so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of the fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
You may be seated. Well, happy fifth Sunday after the Epiphany to you all. Or if you are marking time according to one of our religious national pastimes, happy Super Bowl Sunday. I'm wondering if any of you have ever been in a situation like I find myself in sometimes. If you are absolutely bone tired, but you can't stop and go to bed for whatever reason. Anyone been there? This happens to me a fair bit. I will be working away or maybe watching a show late into the evening, and by late, I mean like 8:30 p.m., until I go straight off an energy cliff. I'm about as tired as a human could possibly be. And yet, I can't yet go to bed. I have to do the bedtime routine, right? The dog needs to be walked, the dishes need to be cleaned, the teeth need to be brushed. And so every once in a while, I will find myself exhausted, bone tired, but in a situation where I literally cannot stop. A few summers ago, I was climbing Mount Stewart in the North Cascades in Washington. My climbing partner, Seth, and I were beginning the day with boundless energy. This was a middle-of-the-night wake-up thing. We were in a beautiful place. We'd been looking forward to this climb for months. The weather was unseasonably warm, but not intolerable, especially at 4 a.m. And so early in the morning, off we went. And while we had maps and knew how to get to the base of the North Ridge of Mount Stewart, which we were climbing, we didn't actually know how long it would take. Complicated terrain, we didn't realize. 8 hours later, we found ourselves at the base of the climb, beginning the technical portion. We had planned on sleeping one night on the mountain at the notch about halfway up, but we were clearly behind schedule already. But we could figure, we figured we could make up the lost time. So we climbed, and just as the sun was setting, we found a spot we could sleep for the night. It wasn't as high as we'd planned, but it would do. After a hot, sticky night, the next morning we launched off, mindful of the fact that we had only brought enough water to get to the summit, where we'd heard that there might be the last vestiges of a snow cap, which hopefully we could drink from. So we climbed, and then up above us, we saw what every climbing party dreads to see: another group on the route. Not just any pair of climbers, but no, there were 4 climbers ahead of us, a party of 4, and they were moving slowly. They had reached the hardest part of the route before us, which is called the crux of the route, giving you a little climber lingo this morning. And there was no way to get around them. It was a bottleneck. We'd just have to wait. By this point, we had long since run out of our last drops of water, and that hoped-for snow cap was still quite a ways above us. As the party of 4 took their time, our stress and anxiety mounted. 5 minutes became 15. 15 became 30. Then 1 hour. Then an hour and a half. Then 2. Finally, after 2.5 hours, the party of 4 finally managed to get through the most challenging 2 sections of the climb. My partner and I were now completely out of water, still well below the summit, and getting uncomfortably close to sunset. We were exhausted, parched, and demoralized. So as we climbed through the crux, hoping against hope to gain the summit before dark, light was fading, and we finally passed that slower party of 4, huddled into a cleft in the rock, preparing for a very uncomfortable night. We carried on. We had no choice. We'd been climbing in the heat of the day and had gone almost 12 hours without water. The headlamps came out of our packs, and we toiled on. We climbed through the night until we could no longer find our way. We'd just have to spend another night without water on the mountain. The next morning, after I see some of you are stressed out. It's okay. I'm here, we're fine. After a few hours sleep, we woke up. We were exhausted, but we had to go just a little bit further. And so we dragged ourselves up the rest of the mountain. Finally, after nearly 24 hours without water, we were almost to the top. And as we pulled through the last few moves of hard rock climbing, we heard the sweetest sound, the unmistakable tinkling of melting glacial ice. And we quenched our thirst with ice-cold streams of water. I can tell you that no water ever tasted so sweet. Our energy and our spirits were restored. And because of that climb, because of that journey from exhaustion to restorative abundance, I felt some resonance with Simon Peter's situation in our gospel for today. Simon obviously isn't on a mountain, but he certainly was exhausted after a long night of toil. The scene that Luke sets for us is this. Jesus shows up at sunrise, bright-eyed and annoyingly bushy-tailed, at a beautiful lake in Galilee, Lake Gennesaret. At this point in Luke's gospel, Jesus is already a popular rabbi, and he has come to teach. But he doesn't have any disciples yet. Nobody to help keep the crowds from pressing in and crushing him. So, without any invitation, he just hops into Simon's boat. I can imagine Simon being a bit chagrined by this. Simon was a fisherman, and he had been fishing all night long. Not only that, he didn't have any fish to show for that. Not a good thing for a professional fisherman. He was exhausted and likely demoralized. He was ready to be done for the day. He wanted to go home, wash up, and rest. But then Jesus jumps into his boat. And if you've ever bumped into a perky, talkative friend right as you were about to go home after a long day of meetings, you can probably imagine how Simon felt. And yet, Jesus was a famous rabbi, so you can't really just kick him out of your boat, right? So there you are, in your own boat, effectively stuck. Simon Peter would just have to wait. After Jesus teaches the crowds on the shore, probably at some length, he wasn't doing these kind of svelte little 12, 13-minute sermons we do up here. He finally begins to wrap up. Simon is probably thinking that he is so close to getting to leave, so close to getting some rest. But that is not Jesus' plan. When he had finished speaking, Jesus said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." I'd almost bet that Simon thought to himself, seriously? Okay, Jesus. But what Simon actually says was more diplomatic. Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet, if you say so, I will let down the nets. You can hear the weariness in his voice, but also, what is it exactly? Maybe a willingness to humor the famous rabbi? Maybe the faintest echo of faith? I'm not sure. But his willingness to say yes one more time to Jesus resulted in this moment of abundance like he'd never seen before. You can imagine the scene of utter joy and chaos. Hundreds of fish flopping all around. Simon's hollering to his partners, "Come and help." His nets are so full that they're bursting. And it's in that moment, when Simon was utterly exhausted by the circumstances of his life, that Jesus met him in his place of weariness. When Simon didn't think he had anything else to give, at the encouragement of Jesus, Simon simply did his job one more time, and that resulted in this unexpected moment of grace. I know that many here today are bone-tired, weary, like Simon. I've heard from many of you that you are feeling ground down, some even hopeless. Life right now for many people is hard. The current news of the loss of life-saving food and medical aid to millions of vulnerable people around the world is painful to witness. And the challenges and uncertainty we are going through as a nation are just hard, no matter your political allegiance. The news updates are relentless. But if you happen to not be fixated on the news, and as your pastor, let me tell you, it is important to turn it off sometimes. That's okay too. Perhaps your attention is more focused on what kind of nachos you're preparing for the Super Bowl, or your job responsibilities, or spending time with kids and grandkids, or maybe just having a good time with extracurricular activities. The reality every Sunday of being a community is that we always have a wide variety of emotional realities in our midst. There's a lot going on. So we rejoice with those who rejoice, and we weep with those who weep. But sooner or later, we will all find ourselves in this place of being bone-tired, of not feeling like we can go on any further. And in those moments, my hope is that we might call to mind the story of Simon, who received God's grace when he least expected it. I do not know how God's grace may come to you this week. I hope it doesn't look like so many smelly fish flopping around that your boat threatens to capsize. But I do know that God's abundant grace is present to us in myriad ways. Just this week, I have experienced a sense of abundant grace during a meal with a friend, during a run through the forest, during an unexpectedly sweet time of snuggling my dog. The reality is that when times are hard, we know what to do. We remember our baptismal calls. We continue to support one another and our neighbors. And we continue to anchor ourselves in our faith and our values and do the work of loving people around the world. And we know that God's grace is present to us in this place too. When we come together to recognize our frailty, to pray for our world, to commune with one another, to sing songs and share words of courage and grace, we are doing the work of letting down our nets one more time. We are taking those final few steps upward in hopes of life-giving water. And God's promise to us is that we will be nourished. Our thirst will be satisfied. God will lift our hearts once more so that we can look for ways to join in God's work in the world. one day at a time. Amen.